Hey everyone, we're gonna give everybody like 5-10 minutes to join in, and then we'll start up today.
Okay. 5 minutes.
Now we gotta like banter a little bit, pretend like we're talking.
Yeah. So how are the kids? How are you guys?
Oh no, not that question.
Banter. Like
They can't see us smiling and laughing at each other.
like the Mac Miller NPR show. Banter.
I love my
How many people we got up in here?
45. 12.
12?
What?
Nice. Hello,
Oh my
everyone.
god.
About 15. Went up.
And are we recording on this thing now?
Yeah,
or-
we're good.
All right.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about objective journalism. We have Christian here. He is the regional chair, the West Regional Chair of NPPA, which is the...
National Press Photographers Association.
And yeah, we're just here. We're going to have a discussion kind of outlining, what objective journalism is, why it's so important, and talking about like on the ground photography, on the ground reporting, and stuff like that. So
Want to introduce yourself?
yeah, so I'm Kamal, Streetwise LA on Instagram.
I'm Raquel, Rock My World Rocky on Instagram.
And I'm Christian Monterrosa, Chris Photography on Instagram. Thanks for having me, guys.
Cool. So let's just jump right in.
Sure.
So why is objective journalism so important?
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to start by kind of giving like a Cliff Notes version on what is objective journalism.
Cool.
Objective journalism can be defined as reporting an event, a story, or a subject without any bias, without any imposed opinion by the person who is doing that reporting. For example, any news or the weather is the easiest example. You talk about the forecast and it's going to be rainy on a Saturday, and you say that it's rainy on a Saturday because the Doppler radar said it was going to be rainy on a Saturday, and that's it, right? That would be an example of objective journalism based on the facts without your opinion. Then you start getting into, well, that's going to ruin my plans. This sucks. I hate the rain. Now you've implemented your opinion. And so that reporting is no longer objective. So that's kind of an example on what that would be.
And people might base their reactions
Sure.
to that reporting based on that reporting.
Sure, that could then therefore influence somebody's opinion on the rain, for example. So the reason why that's so important is for that very reason, right? Is when you start putting in your opinion, when you start putting yourself, for example, into these reports that you're doing, then it calls into question the validity or the accuracy of what it is that you're reporting, right? That in itself is fine if that's what you want to do. And that's when transparency comes into play, to let your audience know that's exactly what you're doing. Nobody goes to Fox News or CNN for objective journalism. They know that it's going to be skewed to either the left or the right based on their opinions, on if that lines up with their view of the world, right? So it's important. Objective journalism can be important because people will go to your platform, to your channel, whatever it is that you're publishing on, because they know that they're there to get just the news, just the weather, right? They don't care what you think about it. They don't care how it affects you or how it might affect them. They just want to know what happened that day, what happened in that location, and then walk away with that knowledge. So it's important that if you are projecting that that's what you're offering the audience, that is in fact what you're delivering, right? And now that's something that is sort of dwindling, which I think we'll touch on in a little bit.
And so for people who say, what about the freedom of expression? And what would be the difference between having that freedom of expression and journalistic freedom?
Sure. Well,
Can I jump in?
Sure.
I just want to make it clear, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to ask them. There's a little bar where you can ask the questions down at the bottom, and we'll get back to as many of them at the end of the conversation as we can.
So to your question, Rocky, freedom of expression is super important, super valid, right, and constitutionally protected, without a doubt, right? Everyone has their right to that. Where it gets tricky, where the lines blur, is when you're passing off your opinion, your freedom of expression as a fact, right? And in a world now of fake news or of alternative facts, like some people might call it, it's important to not give room to those things if you are saying that you're an objective journalist. If you are reporting it as the news, it should be that, right? Freedom of expression gives you the power to be objective or to be biased or to be taking news out of, if you want to say that, I don't know, the circus is in town and it's not, it's your right, go ahead and do that. But people should know that your channel might not be accurate because they're going there to see what you want to say, not necessarily to give the 100% facts, right? And so the difference is that whether it's A or B, A, objective without bias, or B, freedom of expression because you have the right to do that, but not 100% truthful.
And part of that comes from, freedom of expression. There is no real accountability for that. Anybody can say anything that they want, and that is it's a very important part of our democratic process, is that. But the freedom of the press is being able to express yourself as a journalist, but within a certain code of ethics or certain values and morals. And so when I think about the ethics of photojournalism and journalism as a whole, what would you say are like the key core values that distinguish the freedom of expression for a journalist and just freedom of expression for anybody?
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned earlier in terms of validity or in terms of credibility, right? For photojournalism specifically, because we're there, we document these things as they happen, but we don't just put out our photos, right? We give context in the form of words, in the form of video, whatever. If we're not being truthful to the things that are happening, we lose credibility when someone else calls us out on it. When someone else that was truthful when their report doesn't line up with yours, right? And so you lose credibility and people notice, right?
And I think this is something we're seeing so often in mainstream media and just in life in general, is the assault on truth, right? Like, what is the truth, and how do we determine what the truth is?
Right.
And these lines are, especially now more than ever with misinformation and stuff, these lines are being blurred more and more. So this is why our responsibility as photojournalists is becoming even more important, right?
Exactly.
Like this assault on truth, and people are making up the truth as they go along. It really drives home the point about how important it is that we get things right on the ground, right?
Yeah, definitely. And to your question, Rocky, you can, again, I keep saying it, but like it's really the difference between, objective journalism and like your credibility is how you use that freedom of expression, right? If you use it to, give your take on the world, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I think people hold objectivity to this like really high golden standard, and it is if you're somebody like me who like just goes out there, documents what happens, and puts it out there, like that's my only objective when I'm out there, and that's what I've chosen to do. But to people who are choosing to, fight for a cause and show proof that then confirms their bias, like confirmation bias, that's fine too, as long as that's what you're presenting, and you're making that known that that's what it is you're doing.
So that touches on one of the 5 key values. There's like over 400 core code of conduct values within the journalistic creative ethics, but the 5 key are accuracy, independence, impartiality, humanity, and accountability. And so I think that transparency is it's part of that independence. Is it literally states your work, you're not a spokesman for anybody, transparency in your material, and making sure that you are saying that, like you said, if you are pushing a narrative, that you say that so people know what they're tuning into, instead of just making up this as a truth.
Right. Yeah, and I think people who might be like wanting to get into photojournalism, or who just question like the ethics of journalism in general, and it's not in those 5 keys, is like invisibility, right? If you can see a picture or a video of something that happened and not think about who took it, not think about the voice of the person who took that photo, and you're trying to be an objective journalist, then you have succeeded, because you've taken yourself out completely from that process as much as possible. Obviously, like 100% objectivity does not exist, right? You already showing your bias by choosing to cover a subject. Just by being there, your audience knows that you think that that's important. There's no objectivity to that. They already know what you think, right?
So what do you do when you encounter a situation that maybe gets you riled up emotionally, in which you do have a strong opinion or a strong sense or emotion around it? Like, what is something that you do to help maintain that objectivity?
Yeah, I mean, I try. I'm not perfect. Like, I don't think, and nobody is, right? There's no.
We've all been in those situations.
Exactly.
Where we see something that's just.
Everyone.
You can't hold back.
Everyone gets into that situation, whether you're a journalist or a participant in an event, whatever, that's going to affect you somehow. And so when I'm in a situation that affects me personally, I try and compartmentalize, right? I deal with it later. And like the cooler full of beer in the back of my truck will attest to that. Like, I don't say anything. I don't comment on it. I don't choose when to or when not to take a photo that might like translate what I'm feeling in that moment. And again, that's an art form. People have turned that into an art form for their viewers, and I really respect those people.
Is there something going on, like,
yes,
you're able to just shut off when stuff is happening?
I think it's practice. It takes practice. Like, it took me a while to be able to get to that point, but that's my objective when I am in that situation of extreme racism, or of like pure hatred that you're seeing and people direct it at you. I just posted a photo on my Instagram of someone flashing like a white power symbol directly at me, right? And I took that photo. That wasn't by chance. Like, that person was like saying things to me, saying like he was gonna find me and like he was gonna kill me, and he was saying that to people around me as well. And what was my response? I didn't yell back at him. I just lifted my camera and I was like, this guy is yelling and he wants to say that to me, fine, I'm gonna take his picture of that happening. And like, I wasn't invisible, my invisibility was lost at that point because it became about me. But what was happening was still accurate. Like, I still portrayed what was happening without saying, or without like distorting it in a way that made it that made people know how I felt about that, even though obviously it didn't feel good.
And this gentleman was probably doing it at most of the reporters that were there too, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it wasn't just me. It was everyone. Yeah, but that's just an example on how, when something is affecting me personally, I do my very best to just turn that voice off and just like report it shoot that and then deal with that later and talk to people about it.
And let the photos kind of do the talking, right?
Exactly.
And
If people can make their decision, or if people look at my photos and then make their decision based off of what they've seen without like thinking about what I think about it, that's a success for me. Yeah.
So it's definitely like one of the main rules of journalism is to tell the story, not be the story. And I can at least speak for Los Angeles and a lot of what we've seen lately as people who consider themselves press making themselves the story a lot of the time. So you've had a situation with this come up. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Recently, I think I've been following the protest community in Los Angeles since I started this. Like since I was a student in college, right? Like the Black Lives Matter movement started in 2015, 2016. Like someone can fact check me on that one. But I know specifically in 2016, I started going out there as a student, and just kept documenting like these Black Lives Matter protests, and kind of followed, where that went up until now, the evolution of that movement. And something really stood out to me in that within that community recently that I chose to speak out about and report as I saw.
And this
appropriate.
This is, just for everyone, this is recent. This just happened last week, and I think it's something that we really need to talk about today because the facts were wrong, and it was from somebody within the community who likes to put himself in the situation a lot, and it's really touches on almost all the aspects, and it's almost the reason why we're sitting here today to help everyone get more information just about being as objective as they can when they're out reporting and documenting what's going on.
Yeah, so throughout that evolution of the movement, something drastically changed within the last year, and there were reports recently of a black man being killed by a vehicle that had driven through the crowd or hadn't seen him. Those details were unclear, which already was like a red flag. And so
and there was reporting that there were Trump stickers on
exactly, yeah. So this vehicle was projecting to be a Trump supporter, and it ran over a black person at a protest. And so that to me was like a big story, right? Like I was pretty taken aback because we have seen incidents like that most recently here in LA where vehicles are driving through crowds of protesters with opposing political views. So I really started looking into it, and I saw significant holes in the facts, significant holes in the reporting that was out there by people who had claimed to be journalists within the movement. And so I started, asking questions. And this obviously falls outside of the realm of photojournalism, but within the umbrella of journalism as a whole, asking what happened, who did what, why did it happen. And so I really, fell into that because I had been so invested into the movement at this point. And upon asking those questions and doing more digging, I found out or had seen that there was no coroner report for the body. There were no police reports. There was no video, right? And there isn't always video, but if it was a protest, why was there no video of the ambulance coming? Why was there no video of the truck driving away? These
or even witnesses.
These people who attend protests have become like prominent streamers, right? They have an audience now. Some of these people have more followers than I do, and that's great. But why was there nothing to back this up? So I came across, I started digging into the history of these accusations, like where they came from, how they were pushed, how they grew. And so I made a Twitter thread Again, because I could have, pitched this as an article to several outlets that I work with. I was too invested in this at this point. I knew these people, I've interacted with these people, so I didn't really feel comfortable doing that. And so I made a Twitter thread. I put everything that I had found during that time and sort of asked the question, raised the question of like, why did this happen? How did this happen? And I answered some of them through that reporting, through what I had found. And it became controversial because these people who had sort of projected this narrative considered themselves journalists, right? And like, I'm nobody to say whether you're a journalist or not, or you, right? That's not my job. I'm not that official, right? Like, I'm the regional chair of the NPPA, yes, but it doesn't fall under the realm of that job. It's not my job to say who is and who isn't a journalist. But when you look at the history of these people who were pushing that narrative under these guidelines, it doesn't add up. You can't be out there protesting and yelling at the police and say that you're an objective journalist or that what you're saying is accurate, because again, that calls into question your credibility if you're out there doing these things, right? I've seen people out there with NPPA badges protesting, actively participating as a protester, and then when it hits the fan, they throw up the press pass like, I'm a journalist, I'm untouchable, and that's not the case. That's why you can't do that. A, because the cops will come after you. B, because now the audience of people who might not agree with you have reason to not agree with you or not find you credible, because now they've seen you're getting arrested because you were protesting. And so all of these things describe these people who were out here saying they were journalists and pushing a narrative, asking for donations that a lot of people donated to. And then it resulted that it wasn't true. And they apologize, and I commend them for doing that. I respect them for owning up to their miscalculation. I really do.
Sure.
But that's the danger in doing that, right? In presenting yourself as something that you're not, because people will believe you. They will say, well, if he's saying it, it has to be true because he's out there all the time and he's objectively reporting. But if you have a stake in the cause that you're covering, you become biased at that point, and people get hurt because of that, as they did in this situation.
Do you think it's possible that somebody could be, in the movement and still, be an objective journalist? Some people have made livings off of this. Hunter S. Thompson, gonzo journalism, this kind of thing. I mean, do you think that there is real validity to somebody who throws themselves in the mix and then tries to report on it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just don't call yourself an objective journalist and you're fine. Like I said, there is value in being a gonzo journalist, right? Like that's a thing.
And giving that point of view.
Because there's many people out there who don't care to know, the opposing view. Like, they want to hear what they agree with, or they want to watch the news and like they care about you as a person and your perspective on things, and that becomes their audience, like Hunter S. Thompson's audience was. They want to know how he thought about it, how it affected him, what he was doing in that situation, and that's fine. There is value in that. Then that's a respectable avenue to take. It's not better than objective journalism. It's not worse. It's just not the same thing. And so as long as that difference is being disclaimed or like announced, so be it. Like, let it happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you see the future of photojournalism going?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I have no idea, to be honest with you. I think It's changing a lot, and this year specifically, it's changed, as has the world, right? Like everything has changed after this year.
I mean, do you think it's like leveling up? You know, because I think a lot of people are getting their news from Instagram, from
Right.
people on the ground,
Right.
like us, who are simply just putting images out there and saying, you know, here's the photo. Like you decide what you want to take out of that.
Sure.
You know?
So
and especially to go even further,
Yeah.
the assault on mainstream media right now, like nobody trusts it. We have a president who's claiming that all mainstream media is fake
fake.
news.
Hmm.
You know, and so do you think people are going to Instagram and, you know, more independent type journalists to get their information?
Yeah, so for this following answer, whenever I say photojournalism, I'm including photographers, videographers, live streamers, anything visual based. I will call it photojournalism, just for the sake of clarity, right?
Cool.
It has changed in the fact that, you know, the traditional like industry of photojournalism used to be you worked directly for a news outlet like the New York Times, like the Associated Press, and you represented them specifically, and you were on staff, and like that was you, right? And you know, we've seen like the internet kill that industry. You see like people pulling from Twitter and just like aggregating
Reddit.
and just like, oh, someone was there and they posted it, and like that professional from that specific organization wasn't there. Too bad. Like, we're getting this person, even though it's not a good photo, even though it's not a good video. At least,
news is so fast
at least
now.
they were there, right? So that in itself has killed photojournalism as an industry. Not killed it, but like severely hurt it, right? So we've adapted. Now there's freelancers like myself. Now we go to these things, and if they happen, we reach out to our contacts that we've built over time and say, hey, I'm at this thing, this has happened, do you need somebody here? And then you get paid for the day, right? Well, if there isn't somebody who was already there that they got it for free from. So financially, the future of photojournalism is murky, and it's not promising, right? Because of that, rates have dropped, because why would they pay you if somebody was there live streaming and they can just show that, right?
But
But-
good enough, maybe the people are going to be going to your page because they want just the real.
Exactly. So
real.
if you find yourself constantly in these situations and you're trying to build an audience, and you have built an audience, there are other ways to be a professional and a full-time photojournalist. There's new mediums like Patreon, where if you like what I'm reporting, you can contribute to my work so that I can continue this, right? And that's solid. Like, I'll probably be on Patreon in the future if people stop hiring me, because the business model has severely suffered. There's Cash App, people promoting their Venmos. Like, I'm out here, I'm me, but I was here and I'm capturing these things, and I've got an opinion about it, and if you support that, then you could fund it and you could help me keep doing that. And that's become increasingly popular, and there's nothing wrong with that. Whether you're a right-wing streamer and you're out there saying that you hate BLM and this is why, and people pay you for that, or you're on the left side saying Black Lives Matter, which they do, and you want people to support that message, right? And you're asking for money, go ahead and do that. But there's also going to be people who are right in the middle, who just want to say, hey, this has happened, I documented it, whatever you want to think about it, go ahead.
Are there some other resources that we can put people onto that maybe want to dig deeper into these 5 key values?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe some websites, or where
Yeah.
they can really get the full information.
Yeah, sure. I also want to say, like, before getting into that, it's like you don't have to the best education at one of the best colleges to become a journalist or photojournalist. Like, I went to a community college and I learned the ethics, I learned these things, and I applied them to my reporting and my work, and that kind of gained notoriety, and like I was able to become full-time, and people paid me for that service of objectively photographing and filming events and news, right? And to your question before of how the future of photojournalism is changing, because of that, because you don't need to be from a four-year institution or have a master's in like objectivity or whatever, it's allowing more diverse voices into the mix, right? It's allowing the kid from South LA with a camera to like give his perspective on his community that some white kid from Harvard who has like an 8-year degree in journalism wouldn't be able to tell, because he doesn't have that perspective and he doesn't know that community. And so because journalism at the same time has suffered financially, it also is becoming more accessible. And so people from the everyday community, an average low-income household, for example, can do it. And so some of the resources that I think those people who want to get into it should look at are, the NPPA, the Society for Professional Journalists is out there. Watch videos on like objectivity or how to structure a news article, right? Like learn the 5 W's, like who, what, where, when, and why. Like if you can answer those questions for people, you've created value in your reporting.
And I think something that you touched on that's really powerful is, the fact that kids in their neighborhood can tell the story of that neighborhood. I think that's becoming more and more important in today's journalism, in today's reporting, in today's documenting, because they get access and they know their neighborhood better than anyone. So the fact that these doors are opening up is really amazing and powerful, and and the fact that a lot of this stuff is online. So people can look up, how to be an objective journalist.
Sure.
I think if you look at it from that point of view, the future is really bright for photojournalism.
Of course.
Because, like you said, a guy with a Harvard degree going into Compton to try to tell a story in Compton, whereas somebody who grew up there, lives there, knows everybody there. You can't get the stories or even the facts right. Because that guy's not going to get the right story.
Right.
Somebody who's your friend is going to get the right story. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really powerful too.
Yeah. Also, if anyone that's watching this, has questions, like consider me a resource as well. I'm always happy to inform or like teach or mentor people who have come from the same background as me, or who have that alternative upbringing into the journalism world. Like reach out to me, blast me with all of your questions. Like I'm more than happy to answer them as best as I can as well.
And that goes for these streets too. Hit us up too if you have any questions. We would love to hear from you by email, by DM, whatever we can do.
So actually, before we even jump into that, we're actually going to have a Q&A right now with Chris. But for anybody who is watching, we do have an email sign up. So DM us your email, because after each one of our workshops and talks, we send out a resource list. So these resources that Christian just mentioned and a bunch of other ones that we're going to put together will come out through an email. And then you can also just be in that email to receive resource list information, workshops and talks that are going to come up. And just be part of the community, because I think that's something that we're all really striving to do, is build a community of photographers, no matter what experience level you are. Like we're all here to dig into each other's toolboxes and really learn from each other. And so that's something that we're striving to do here. And this is our second workshop. Our first one was with Dee, our legal observer, who let us know about, she's actually right here, y'all, who taught us a little bit about knowing our rights when we're out here on the street. So it's something that we're really passionate about, is to make sure that everybody has the tools that they need to really go out there. No matter if you are somebody who just graduated high school who wants to be a journalist, or somebody who is a journalist and maybe needs to brush up, or someone who is in high school, you know, like, consider these streets your community.
So I guess we'll open it up. Did we get any questions?
We'll open up into discussion now from the people that tuned in to ask questions for Chris. We have a few in the comment box, but there's also a few conversations that were had on the kind of
The live chat.
live chat that people were doing here. Nick Eisman says, hey.
Thanks for watching, Nick.
Let's see, let's go to the first one. There's a lot of people that joined in. So there was a few questions from multiple different people, but there was also some opinions. Fun Civilized says, objective journalism is hard because we all have bias and a stake on the event. The best we can do is approach it impartially, but in my honest opinion, there's no such thing as objective journalism. What do you have, or do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree, actually, and I touched on that a little bit earlier. Total objectivity is impossible unless you're like a robot who shows up with a camera and has like some sort of like AI like algorithm. There is no such thing as total objectivity. I do agree with that, because like I said, by being at a scene or by choosing to cover a story, you've shown you're biased towards that in some way. You've already shown that you think that that's important. Regardless of like if that's right or wrong, you've shown a bias towards it, right? When you take a photo, for example, why did you take the photo? Because you thought that was noteworthy, and you've shown bias towards that moment. Regardless of if you think it's right or wrong, you have shown that you think that that's important and that needs to be seen, and you've shown your bias towards that moment. So I would agree with that total objectivity is impossible, but you can refrain from giving your opinion on what it is that you're seeing or where it is that you are. And so that's the difference, right? It's not so much as to being totally objective, but you can present something as best you can without influencing what has happened to your audience and let them decide.
Like just
Yes.
the who, what, why, when,
Exactly.
where, why, and then the photo.
Exactly.
And then letting people kind of figure
People
it out
can
for
figure that one
themselves.
out for themselves.
Cool.
Member by the name of Aliaster MF Photos asks, what is the stance of objective journalism with pathos? Should ethos and logos be what we're mostly focusing on?
That's a deep
Wow.
question. Can you ask that one more time?
So what is the stance of objective journalism with pathos? And should ethos and logos be what we're mostly focusing on?
That's a deep question. I think, look, it can be whatever you want it to be, right? Like, if you think that you want to focus on ethos, do that. If you want to focus on pathos, do that, because someone else is focusing on the opposite. Like, it's your decision. It's not, I mean, like I said, you've made the decision on what you think is important. So go and do it and present it in whatever way you think is important. There is no one right way to do it. There's just different ways to do it. And so whatever it is that you think is important, I would urge you to focus on that.
I think there's a difference between bias and objectivity, right? Like, being objective is different than being biased. We all have bias, but we can be objective,
Sure,
Yeah.
right?
sure.
Yeah.
So I think making that distinction is really important.
Definitely.
We all come with bias. We know that, but just presenting the who, what, why, where, when, where, why, and showing a photo and letting the audience kind of figure it out for themselves. That's what we're gonna try to do to keep people, and keep things truthful.
Exactly.
right? Because
Exactly.
like the
Or
assault
keep
on the
things
truth.
accurate, because then we
Keep
can
things
also
accurate.
argue like what is the truth, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's just more about like accuracy to ensure that people really understand what happened in whatever situation you documented.
Definitely.
The next question is more of a personal one for you, Chris. How did you feel being surrounded by Proud Boys, and did they ever give you a hard time for taking photos?
Which time? But yeah, yes, I felt weird, obviously, right? Like knowing how they feel about people that look like me, you know. That just being there, I'm in danger, right? Like when I'm at these events, let's say Oregon, for example, where like open carry is legal, and everyone's got guns. Now I've got Proud Boys who could shoot me. I've got cops who could shoot me because they're shooting black and brown people at a higher rate than any other race in this country. I've got counter protesters that might accidentally shoot me because they've got guns too. And so I'm like protected to the teeth, right? To try and like be there but not get killed, and also not be there. So I'm juggling like a few factors at this point. And so it felt surreal to like look in the mirror and see like what I was wearing, and then thinking about like what I was doing there, and if it was even worth like risking my life. And I came to the decision that it was, right? But it felt important, because if I'm feeling that, I can't imagine what the people who weren't there are feeling, right? Like if I can inform these people on, like, we know about the Proud Boys because someone else went and asked them what they think, right? We know about Antifa because someone else went and asked them what they think. And so if I can be out there and like show what they do, and that can like inform someone on if they agree or disagree with how Proud Boys act or conduct themselves, then like, so be it. I'll do whatever it takes to be able to do that.
Just more context.
Yeah. So, but to answer your question, I was terrified and like, yeah, scared.
All right. Another one by Fun Civilized. He says, we should also define the term the movement as well. Your movement is different from any other movement. Your movement is different than my movement, and that movement is different from POC in South Central LA than their movement.
Mm-hmm.
Is there so many other places? There are so many other places we as journalists and photojournalists in general need to go in order to properly map the movement. The movement isn't exclusive to just the streets, the protests, and whatever gets posted on in this together.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that long form storytelling is the most important type of journalism, right? Like, put in the time to build a relation. It's also the hardest. Put in the time to build a relationship with people, getting them to agree to tell their story, being able to do it as objectively as possible, and not like getting emotionally involved. That's really, really hard to do. And I agree that it's, this Black Lives Matter movement is not just about the protests. It's not just about police brutality. It's about, it's also about, emotional involvement and effects on the people that you don't see when you're out there. I personally have chosen to show how this movement is progressing on the streets specifically. And I'm working on things that kind of, now that the protests have died down, how to continue to tell that story outside of the streets. But I would urge anyone who, doesn't have the money for the gear to be out on the street, or like has a condition that doesn't let them be out on the street, or is worried for their safety, to find those angles that you're talking about, and tell those stories, because I agree that that's also part of it.
And I think if we can circle back to, that's why it's so important for people within their own communities to tell these stories. because we're not going to know them unless you go and you talk to your grandma about what happened and some of the backstory as to why we're here. You know, just again documenting this stuff and shining a light on every city will bring the bigger picture to life, you know, so that we can see what's going on and really figure out how all the pieces fit together.
Alright, let's go to the next one. There's a few just random discussions that I think somebody broke their camera and they're all trying to find out how to fund this guy's camera. Yeah.
GoFundMe.
Let's see.
Okay.
From the main comments. Fun Civilized Sex again. Can you guys talk about censorship on these platforms? Is that something that aligns with, objective journalism?
I mean, I haven't experienced censorship personally.
Well, we don't really censor anything in our photos.
I mean, right, and we don't censor things like, as you can see, like people agree and disagree with me all the time and call me out for it, and like that's fine. I welcome that, and I don't block people on my page because, again, my job is to like start the conversation, not be the conversation. But I think other people can take form of censorship by like shaming someone for their opinion, or saying that like, they're biased reporting, or just like that negative energy can take form of censorship, and so that does exist. But in terms of like, Twitter, like blocking and flagging, tweets and information, like that's a thing, but that's not something that I'm, an expert on. So I won't talk about that, but yeah, censorship is a thing. And I think before people sort of comment and like weigh in on what they're seeing, they should think like, am I contributing to this conversation, or am I disagreeing and want it to stop? Because I think that that's wrong.
For journalists who claim they work objectively for corporate media companies, they often give more space to the landlords, cops, and electeds, and less time to the average people. How do journalists fight this bias?
I mean, there's only so much we can do in that situation, right? Like, if you're a freelance journalist and you find a story, and you call it like it is, and then the news outlet that you're working for changes that or like takes that part out, like don't work for them, take it somewhere else, right? Like that's one of the like most freeing parts about being freelance is I make that decision, right? Like, yes, I have editors, and yes, they make those decisions at some point, but if I don't agree with that, or if I think that that's unfair, or they're misrepresenting my work, I have the choice to walk away and give it to someone else who will do it. But that's a good question because that does happen. There, corporate media have interests as well, and so objectivity can only go so far with those places, and that's always something that you have to think about, both as a journalist, as a viewer, or just like anyone who's interested in news, is that wherever you're reading it, regardless of who it is or what it is, there's at some point some conflict of interest, and you got to keep that in mind.
And I think that we're seeing the bias within mainstream media is so obvious, and everyday people it's so easy to pick up on that they're just tired of it. Like, they really do want on the ground reporting from somebody within their own neighborhood telling the story. It's a serious demand. So, again, we encourage everyone, pick up a pen and paper. If you can afford a camera, pick up a camera. Even if it's just a film camera, just start documenting this stuff. Because we need you now more than ever, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, we need people on the ground more than ever telling these stories, because the media is always pushing an agenda, and again, you're going to come with bias. We get that. But at least you're a person from your neighborhood telling the story. So I think if we can, drive that one home. I really.
Yeah.
Plus, I love reading those stories and hearing those.
Yeah,
stories.
definitely.
Everybody does.
Someone's always gonna identify or agree with your perspective, or maybe they've been feeling a certain type of way and haven't been able to put it into words, and you did, and you've now given them the language to express whatever they're feeling, or that oppression or that injustice that they've experienced. Guaranteed somebody will find value in your perspective. And as long as you're out there saying, hey, this is my perspective on this, and this is what's happening to me, there's always room for that.
And it opens up so much more discussion too, right? When people actually start talking when that happens, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the essence of photography is it's a humanitarian process. It's by the people, for the people. We're here to tell the stories for people. I think in its truth, in its essence, it's not about telling a story for Fox. It's about communicating from human to human what's happening in our world together, so that we can understand and we can open up those views and build compassion and build a grander viewpoint of what the world is and what our neighborhood is. So like you were saying, don't be afraid to use your voice and to tell the story of you, your neighborhood, what you're seeing, what you're feeling. It all has value.
Yep.
Next question, going back to Fun Civilized. What do you think cultivating sources means in an era of pervasive surveillance and dry snitching? What kind of what? Sorry, Fun Civilized, but I can't see the rest of your...
No worries. I think I get the gist of the question. It's the same thing, right? Maybe surveillance and dry snitching has changed your approach into how you build these sources, or how you communicate, or your methods. But it's the same thing, and it boils down to trust, right? If a source sees your reporting, and they do, trust me, if it's a sensitive issue, they're gonna look at who you are, who they're telling this valuable news or piece of information to. And if they find you a credible person, and they trust you, regardless of how you convey that message, they're gonna give it to you. Whether it's going back to Deep Throat meeting in an old parking lot, deep underground, and in the shadows whispering yo, I heard this happened, right? That's still, you're still cultivating that source, and you're still showing yourself to be trustworthy with that information. So I do agree that it's gotten harder. I wouldn't post on Facebook hey, let me know if you've got any leads on any stories, and then people comment on there that's not a thing. I wouldn't advise anybody to do that. But yeah, it's just different now. But it's different, but the same in the way that we build trust with people.
Okay. C.S_Mark. This is a 3-part question. Part 1, do you think media is biased enough that the people should move away from traditional media? Part 2, such as CNN, Fox, Washington Post, etc. They're still truthful institutions, of course. However, are we seeing a movement away from those sources to more grassroots approach?
I think we touched on this.
Yeah.
I'll answer this question, but no. I was just in DC at this Million MAGA March or whatever. All those people know that Fox is not objective, right? Everyone watching this, everyone in this room knows that Fox is not objective. How is Fox still successful? How is OAN and the Christian News Network or whatever it's called, how are they successful? Because these people want to go to where the news that they agree with is being told. There were thousands and thousands of people in DC this past weekend. All of them agree that CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times is fake. They all agree.
And some are even now saying that Fox.
And now they're
fake.
turning their backs on Fox as well, because they're not giving them the news that they want to hear.
Yeah.
So actually, I think that biased reporting if anything, is growing and like becoming more popular because that's what the people want to hear. They want to hear what they agree with, unfortunately. And objectivity is a dying breed, right? Because nobody cares what happened. They care about what's going to confirm their bias. So, take that as you will.
Question by B. Solis. How do you feel about blurring faces as a journalist? Do you feel a responsibility to refrain from using misogynistic, something? I can't see the rest of that question, but we'll go with the first. How do you feel about blurring faces?
I disagree with it because I never, and that's one of those ethical things that you'll find in the MPPA guidelines, is never manipulate a photo, right? You're taking what happened and it's there. I disagree with blurring faces because, like I said, it's not truthful to what you captured, and B, not everyone wants their faces blurred, to be honest. People have asked me, hey, don't take my picture, and I say, okay, that's fine. I won't take your picture. Like, that's fine. But I think by blurring, there's a good article out there by Brent Lewis.
He's a photo editor for the New York Times, and he raised a good point. If you go back and look at the pictures from like Martin Luther King's movement, right, or the civil rights movement, people weren't blurring faces back then. And yes, there are instances of law enforcement using photos to prosecute people. That happens. But at what point is it the responsibility of the person who doesn't want to be identified to make themselves unidentifiable, right?
And the reverse can be said. There's been cases in which photography has actually helped cases to prove what actually happened.
Of course, I see this quite often, and I apologize if this offends anyone, and I realize that this might be an unpopular opinion, but I get called out quite often for posting photos of faces. I mean, I have no interest in like snitching, right? I don't care like if someone's breaking a window or like doing some kind of misdemeanor crime. Like, I don't care. I don't get off on like saying, "Ooh, look what this person did." Like, I don't care about that.
This is what happened.
This is those who called me out are using my photos to prove something that they want to convey, to prove their point, right? And they're saying, "Hey, look at this photo. See what I mean?" Right? Is anyone asking me to blur the faces of Proud Boys? No. And so I will never blur anyone's face, because all I do is take photos of what happened. And again, like, I do believe in consent. I do believe in, not causing harm to the person that I'm photographing. And so there are extenuating circumstances where I won't show somebody's face or make that agreement
Or you
beforehand.
won't post the photo.
Or I won't post the photo. I have so many photos of people's faces that I don't post because there's no value to it.
That's what if I really think that somebody's gonna get arrested for a photo that I took, I might think twice about posting. That's just me. I mean, everyone is different, but if I really am like, oh, this person's gonna go to jail for this photo, like, I might think twice about posting.
Yeah. Thanks, Shao B. Solis, for that question. If you want to talk more about it, hit me up.
Maybe we'll take like one or two more questions and then wrap it up.
That was it, actually.
Oh, perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you for everybody who came out today. Thank you, Christian, for being here and talking with us. Thank you, Kamal, for being here and moderating.
Sure.
Please DM us your email if you want to follow up on getting a resource list and just knowing about upcoming workshops and talks that we're having. And thank you so much, These Streets, for hosting us and hosting a continuous education and workshop platform. Peace out, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.